Every time I opened the door to my apartment, my heart raced in anticipation of seeing my beloved wife. But that time I walked in, it was all wrong. My Nancy was fucking Carter, my ex-friend. Their bodies entwined on our bed caused me a storm of anger and pain. I stood on the doorstep, stunned and clenched with rage, unable to believe my eyes. At that moment I realized that I had not returned home, but to hell, where I was to hold a real trial and avenge all the humiliation they had inflicted on me.
Thank you for watching my channel. I create videos for your enjoyment. Please subscribe if you want to support my efforts, it's very important to me. I apologize in advance for any mistakes. Dubbing is done by neural network. Please point out mistakes in the comments so I can correct them.
I looked at their pleasure-filled faces and felt a cold sweat run down my spine. Carter was running his palm over Nancy's thighs with a smirk, and she seemed oblivious to the moment, not noticing that everything was falling apart. My heart beat faster, and everything around me seemed to freeze. I took a step forward, my voice piercing the silence. "What are you doing?" I shrieked, and at that moment everything seemed to stir again. Nancy turned around, her eyes filled with terror, but it was too late. I could feel my rage growing into an uncontrollable hurricane. Carter, with a bewildered look on his face, looked up, but immediately realized the situation he was in. I didn't wait for him to gather himself. My fists found his body, and I came at him with fury, making him pay for his betrayal. Every punch, every scream was like a release from the pain I carried within me. I felt the adrenaline fill me, and I kept hitting him, not knowing how much time had passed. Finally, Carter slipped out from under my arms and rushed toward the exit, covering himself with his hands. Nancy, rushing toward me, started screaming, but I didn't want to listen to her. All my hatred was spilling out. "Get out," I said hatefully. "Both of you. Without your things. I don't want to see you." As they ran out of the apartment, naked and humiliated, I didn't feel an ounce of pity. I didn't care if the neighbors saw them. I didn't care that my wife was embarrassing herself for the whole house right now. It made me happy to let everyone see what a whore she was. I closed the door behind them, leaned back against it, and closed my eyes. Thoughts pounded in my head. The rage was slowly subsiding, but its trace remained. I was ready for the consequences, but I lacked the calm to realize the enormity of what had happened. A sense of betrayal was tearing inside me. I never thought my life would turn out this way. The Nancy I had built a future with turned out to be just a fragile shell hiding an abyss of lies. I couldn't believe that I hadn't found in her the one I loved, but only a mask under which a traitor hid. Every attempt to remember the happy moments with her brought only anger. I saw how she laughed, how sincerely she trusted me. Now it all seemed false. I realized that everything that had been between us was shattered in an instant. I had been deceived, and the thought only made me hate her. I began to consider what to do next. I wasn't going to leave it like this. I knew she had to respond. Divorce was just the beginning. I wanted her whole life to be a nightmare. I was determined to destroy everything she had built. Every phone call she made, every text message she sent me was nothing but contempt. I knew she would try to explain herself, but I had no desire to listen to her. I didn't want to be her victim, and every day of inaction felt like weakness. I intended to act. Time passed slowly as I contemplated revenge. I locked the door tightly, as if it could protect me from the memories of what had happened. I could feel the plan growing inside me, and the more I thought about it, the more energy it gave me. When I woke up the next morning, my head was still ringing with rage. I remembered what they looked like, excited, carefree. I had to capitalize on that. I sank into my thoughts, not knowing how to continue. My ex-friend and my wife, they both took away my happiness. I knew I wasn't just going to let it go. I started to put my feelings together like they were puzzle pieces, and I tried to figure out how they should fit together. Did she really think I could forgive this? I was tearing apart all the memories of us planning our future, building our dreams. It all seemed like nonsense now, and I was ashamed that I had once trusted her. Each new day brought only a reminder of her betrayal. I saw her on social media, her smiling face full of carefree. It was like a punch to the gut. I knew I couldn't let this go on. It was time for revenge. She had to feel the consequences. I made a plan. The first order of business was divorce. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to realize what she'd done. She had to realize she'd lost me forever. I started gathering documents, thinking about how to present this to her family and friends. Every decision was difficult, but I knew it wouldn't be any other way. In my head, I plotted the paths of revenge like a strategist on the battlefield. I knew Nancy would try to contact me, begging for forgiveness, but I didn't want to hear from her. I was determined to act. Meanwhile, rumors of her free nights began to spread. I heard acquaintances whispering about it, and I marveled. Every time I learned of her humiliations, I felt pride rise in me. She had to pay for everything she had done. I found an old account on an adult website and began to think about how I could best utilize it. I knew I would leave her contacts there, and that would be the final chord in our story. I planned out how to get her to the point of no return. Every step I took filled me with confidence. I watched her world crumble, and it was satisfying. I was preparing myself to watch her fall, and it brought me joy. I was no longer the weakling who resigned himself to betrayal. I was now the hunter. A few days later, I began to contemplate every step of my revenge. I knew there had to be a clear strategy. The first step was to divorce Nancy, but for a reason. I wanted her to realize that she had lost everything. I started gathering information about her life, her friends and acquaintances. I knew she had connections that could play into my hands. While she remained in the dark, I worked on my plan. I created a fake account on an adult website and started adding her contacts. I knew it would be a low blow, but that's what it took. I didn't want her to be able to just walk away with a light heart. She had to feel like she had lost everything. I sat at my computer every night, scribbling down texts that would ruin her reputation. I felt like a puppeteer playing with people's fates. Each message I prepared filled me with satisfaction. I realized that this would be my small triumph. But I also realized that I had to be careful. Nancy couldn't suspect that I was planning something. I continued to act as if nothing had happened. I didn't return her calls and endless messages. The day after I made my plan, I felt trapped. Nancy kept texting me, and even though I didn't want to read them, I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. Every word she wrote reminded me of what had happened, and the heartbreaking sense of betrayal came over me again. I remembered how we used to cook dinners together, laughing and making plans. It seemed like only a short time ago she had been the woman most dear to me, and now her smile seemed hypocritical. There was no sincerity in her words, only attempts at manipulation, and I could feel it. I found her social media profile and started following her life. She was actively posting pictures with her friends, and in each of her posts I noticed something new that added fire to my rage. She went on with her life as if nothing had happened, and that was unbearable to me. I decided I had to know more. That night I met with an acquaintance who could tell me about her new relationship. He was someone who always knew what was going on in our circle. When I asked him a question about Carter and Nancy, he grinned and said he had heard about them together. Those words felt like they pierced me. They're both not too secretive, he added. Carter says he's always been interested in her. I knew it would happen someday. With each new piece of information, I could feel my rage flaring. I couldn't let them just go unpunished. I was gathering facts, building connections to create a more complete picture of their treason. The next morning, the moment I woke up, I already had a clear plan. I knew I had to approach this with a cool head, but the rage inside me was uncontrollable. I decided that I would send her a message. Something simple to get a reaction. "How are you?" I wrote, trying to keep my tone neutral. A few minutes later a reply came back. "I'm fine, I miss you. How are you?" Her words made me feel nothing but contempt. I knew it was just a game, but I decided to continue. "We could meet," I replied, trying to hide my true intentions. My plans for revenge began to take shape. I knew the meeting had to happen so I could look her in the eye and let her know that I wasn't going to forgive her. When the day of the meeting came, I had mixed feelings. I didn't know what exactly I was feeling, anger, hurt, or even a little bit of hope. But I knew I needed this moment to be complete. I arrived at the cafe where we'd met before and chose a table in the corner so I could see when she came in. When Nancy walked in, I noticed her face change when she saw me. She took a step back as if she had encountered a ghost. I felt my blood boil. She walked over and sat down across from me, and in that moment I realized that everything was about to happen now. "You look good," she said, trying to keep a smile on her face. "So do you," I replied, but there was no sincerity in my voice. I could see how nervous she was, but she tried to hide it. "How did you spend your time?" she asked, but I wasn't going to answer her questions about how I was doing. Instead, I decided to strike at the heart of the matter. You know, I've been thinking about us a lot, I began, and her face changed slightly. I remembered how much you betrayed me. Her reaction was immediate. She tried to justify herself, to talk about how things weren't what they seemed. But I didn't want to hear her explanation. I could see her trying to make a logical chain, but it all sounded like a misplaced attempt to cover up her actions. Do you really think it's possible? I interrupted her, looking her straight in the eye. You don't stand a chance. I know about you and Carter. In that moment, I saw her confidence disappear. She fell silent, her eyes filled with tears. I knew she realized her world was crumbling. Please, let's talk calmly, she said, but I only grinned. Calm? How can you talk calmly after what you did? I felt anger fill me, but I was relieved at the same time. Finally, I could express everything that was bothering me. I was preparing for the final reprisal. After our meeting, I returned home, full of new emotions and thoughts. I realized that I could not stay in this situation any longer. I decided it was time to act. I gathered all the documents I might need for the divorce and got down to business. Each day got harder, but thoughts of revenge kept me going. I knew that Nancy wouldn't be able to just forget what had happened. I began to plan how it would all turn out for her. Over the next few days, I actively sought information on how to properly file for divorce. I knew she would try to manipulate, but I had a plan. I wasn't going to let her get away with it unpunished. I was preparing evidence that could help me in court. But there was still one thing. How exactly was I going to publish her contacts on an adult website? I wanted her to feel the weight of her choice. This wasn't just revenge, it was a demand for justice. I spent several evenings drafting a text that could be posted. Every time I heard her name in conversation or her face on social media, it only made me feel worse. But at the same time, I realized that this was just a step towards releasing the pain. Eventually, I picked a moment when her name was mentioned in conversation again. I was ready. I created a new account and posted information that would drive her to despair. I was full of anticipation for it to start spreading. Every time I opened my email, I waited to hear back from her friends, acquaintances, even coworkers. I wanted everyone to know what she had done. I knew it could be cruel, but she had put me through hell, and now I was going to make her feel that same hell. A few days passed and rumors started to spread around town. I felt like a conductor in a symphony of destruction when I saw her name flickering through the conversations. All these days I waited for her to realize for herself that her life would no longer be the same. Soon I started getting messages from people I knew asking what had happened. I answered without holding back my anger, telling them what she had done. I wasn't going to keep it a secret. I could see her reputation begin to crumble, and there was the sweetness of revenge. I felt like a winner in a game where the stakes were too high. I couldn't wait for Aliona to face reality and see her life fall apart before my eyes. But then one day, I got a text from her. She wrote that she wanted to meet and talk. At that moment, I felt the rage rise up in me again, but I also felt some anxiety. What was she going to say? I replied that a meeting was possible, but only on my terms. I wanted her to realize that I was now in control and she would not be able to walk away from this. I set up a meeting at the same cafe where we last spoke. When the day of the meeting arrived, I couldn't shake the feeling of tension. Nancy showed up and I could see how depressed she looked, her eyes reminding me of earlier moments when she was happy. I wasn't going to give in to her emotions. It's your own fault, I said, not hiding my feelings. You're a whore, and you ruined your life. She tried to justify herself, but I interrupted her. You know what pisses me off the most? You don't even realize how much pain this is going to cause you. Nancy tilted her head, her face a mixture of despair and depression. I knew she was hoping for forgiveness, but I was relentless. I have a plan, I said, looking into her eyes. And it will leave you no chance. She squinted at me, a look of concern in her eyes. I decided it was time to cut to the chase. I'm going to divorce you, I continued, keeping my gaze on her. And it's not going to be an easy process. You'll lose everything, the house, the money, and your name will be muddied. Nancy turned pale, but I knew I had to move on. I'm going to tell everyone about your cheating with Carter. I'm going to leave your contacts on an adult website and everyone will see what you're really like. Let you get more clients for your services. You can handle them all, can't you? She jumped up, her voice trembling. You can't do that. I can, I replied coldly. You brought me to this. You destroyed our family, and now you have to pay the price." I could feel the rage overwhelming me, but at the same time I felt the satisfaction of finally being in control. She began to cry, and it made me feel conflicted. On the one hand, I felt sorry for her, and on the other hand, I realized that she had chosen this path. The next day, I made a decision. I created a fake profile on an adult website and posted information about her. I wrote text that would reflect all of her accomplishments, and added photos I could find on her social media, as well as a few photos from our family archive that we took in bed. This was done with cold calculation. I wasn't going to give her a chance. Throughout the day, I watched for reactions. I wasn't just doing it for revenge, but because I wanted to see her world start to crumble. Surprisingly, within a few hours, I started getting messages from people I knew who had heard about her new fun. "Are you okay?" one of my friends asked. "I've been hearing strange things about Nancy." I replied without hiding my schadenfreude. I did my best to add fuel to the fire by talking about her cheating, about how she had betrayed me. With each new response, I felt my revenge becoming a reality. After a couple days, the calls from her friends started. They were trying to find out what was going on. I didn't even try to hide my delight when they asked if it was true. I replied that it was all true and that Nancy just couldn't deal with the consequences of her actions. But one day I got a text from a close friend of hers who asked me how I could do such a thing. This caused me a great deal of irritation. I wasn't going to let anyone know that I regretted my actions. She deserved it. Her profile and pictures should be seen by more men. Why limit myself to Gosha? Suddenly, however, I received a message from Nancy herself. She urged me to reason, telling me that I didn't understand the consequences. I was ready to ignore her, but something stopped me. I reflected on how far I'd come. I didn't want to just ruin her life. I wanted her to realize what real pain was. But what if it led to even worse consequences? I couldn't help but think about how it would affect her family, the people who might be affected by my anger. Nevertheless, I continued to follow my plan. One day I heard a conversation behind me as co-workers were discussing Nancy. I felt something inside me twitch. I wasn't just a vigilante, I was becoming part of something much bigger. At my next meeting with Nancy, which was already scheduled, I decided that I was going to be one step ahead. I had to know what to expect from her. I had new trump cards prepared so I wouldn't give her a chance. When the day of the appointment came, I was determined. We met at the same cafe, and this time the atmosphere was completely different. Nancy came in with an expression of despair on her face. She clearly realized that her world was falling apart. "You can't just ruin everything," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "You chose this path," I replied, looking at her calmly. "I'm only showing you the consequences." She began to cry, and this time it didn't move me. I could feel the cold resolve building up inside me. I wasn't going to back down. "I hate you," she said, looking into my eyes. "Can you really be so cruel?" "I'm not cruel, I'm just opening your eyes to reality," I replied. "You're going to lose everything you have, and those aren't empty words. I've opened your eyes to what you really are. You're a whore." In that moment, I realized that this revenge isn't just for me. I wanted her to realize the depth of her choices. I was ready to go all the way. A few days passed after I posted about Nancy on the adult website. I could feel the tension building and at the same time felt the satisfaction of my revenge. Every time I opened my phone and saw new messages from acquaintances discussing her accomplishments, joy erupted in my chest. Nancy's world was rapidly crumbling. I watched her lose friends, her reputation crumble, and it gave me incredible satisfaction. I watched her from afar, and every experience she went through was like a sweet treat for my heart. She called me several times, but I ignored her. I wasn't going to hear her excuses or tears. Her friends tried to find out what was going on, but I was ruthless. I shared the details of her cheating with them, and soon they too turned their backs on her. There was a special thrill in seeing her life go to hell. I wasn't just getting revenge, I was witnessing her downfall, and it was empowering. At work, I started hearing gossip about her. Colleagues were discussing how she was once a model wife and how she had changed. It was a domino effect. Her changes affected everyone around her. I couldn't help but rejoice when her name was spoken with disdain. The satisfaction that I had accomplished what I had accomplished flared up inside of me. But the real consequences became apparent when I received a message from Carter. He tried to justify himself, to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. I laughed when I read his words. He didn't realize that I wasn't just a player in this game, I was the referee. I replied to him that now everyone knew what he was really like, and that he'd better stay away from me and Nancy. I felt that this was all just the beginning. My revenge was bringing me more than I could have imagined. I thought about the future, how easily I could destroy her life. I didn't regret what I had done. On the contrary, it was the release I had long awaited. Every time I passed by her house, I felt a fire ignite inside me. I longed for her world to shatter completely. Perhaps it was cruel, but I wasn't going to stop. Nancy had chosen this path for herself. I kept watching her reactions. One day I saw her on the street. She was with a friend and her face looked haggard. I felt satisfaction growing inside me. She was no longer the confident woman I had known before. Each new day brought new successes in my plan for revenge. I soon learned that her family had found out about her adventures. I couldn't contain my laughter as I heard her mother trying to find out what had happened. It was a moment of triumph. I felt I had achieved everything I wanted. I had no regrets. Every time I looked at her suffering, I felt like I was doing her justice. I wasn't just getting what I wanted, I was getting what I wanted. And that was the beauty of revenge. It brought me power and control over a situation I'd been unable to have for so long. I wasn't going to regret my actions. I felt strong and confident, and that was what mattered in this moment. I knew this was just the beginning, and I couldn't wait to see how far my revenge would go.